Welcome to the next in our series of webinars on NGOs and the voluntary targets, in which we focus on each of the voluntary targets and how to use them in your advocacy as an NGO. In this webinar, we look at the subject of speed management. This is target 6 that states by 2030, half the proportion of vehicles traveling over the posted speed limit and achieve a reduction in speed-related injuries and fatalities. To talk about NGOs, how NGOs can advocate for reducing speed, we welcome Rod King, founder of 20's Plenty for Us. And you know Rod from our global meeting in Malaysia in 2017. 20's Plenty, his organization, equips grassroots campaigners around the UK, the United Kingdom, and beyond to advocate for 20 miles per hour or 30 kilometers per hour speed limits in their local communities. Thank you very much for joining us, Rod.
Hello, my name is Rod King and I'm the founder and campaign director of 20's Plenty for Us. The 20 refers to 20 mile an hour, which is the equivalent of 30 kilometers per hour. We campaign for this to be the default speed limit for urban and village streets, with higher exceptions only where it can be justified. 20's Plenty was formed in 2007, and now we support over 400 local community groups that are campaigning for such a policy. In the UK, now 25% of the population live in local authorities with such a policy. In other countries where kilometres are used, then we campaign under the name Love 30. By the way, the MBE in my title is an honorary award made by the Queen in 2013 for services to road safety. Perhaps before we go through the presentation, I can ask a couple of questions to consider. First, how do we share fairly and safely the public spaces between buildings that we call streets? And how do speed limits question our values, our rights, and justice to use those public spaces? So 20's Plenty for Us, Love 30, it's UK-based, we're a voluntary organisation supporting communities who want lower speed limits. We're not for profit and rely on thousands of volunteers in communities campaigning to make their places better places to be. What we say is a 20 mile an hour default limit on the streets, or total 20 as an aim. It's not putting in speed bumps, and it's exceptions determined by the local authority or community. It's very much about retrofitting communities for active travel, and it's community-led, establishment endorsed, and most importantly, I think it's clear to say that we do want to transform the way our urban and village roads are shared. In the presentation, I plan to cover why speed is important, speed limits, the difference between the actual danger and perceived danger on our roads, why 30 kilometers is the maximum speed where people are, and what you can do to bring forward that debate on speeds and then implement lower speed limits. So first, why is speed important? Well, speed is implicated in nearly every crash that happens. For many crashes, it's a direct cause of a collision. It can lead to loss of control, lack of vision, the tunnel vision effect, where you only see immediately what's in front of it and lose some of that peripheral vision. For most, it's the reason why a collision can't be avoided when an incident happens. Speed impairs everything. It works against our human and mechanical crash avoidance systems. Drivers and other road user reaction times and decision making get impaired, suspension and braking capability gets impaired, and it reduces the motor vehicle handling and responsiveness. Emissions are also increased by speed. The energy to get to a particular speed is proportional to the speed squared. Hence, to get to 50 kilometers per hour takes nearly 3 times the energy to get to 30 kilometers per hour. And it's even greater if a motor vehicle is poorly maintained, with the acceleration and braking, tire emission and brake dust which comes from those components. And of course, survivability of people is very much determined by speed. And in fact, road safety researchers show that the fourth power of law with regard to speed combines the cause, the non-avoidance of collisions, and the severity of the outcome to actually say that the outcomes can be very much proportional to the fourth power of speed. So speed limits are important, and we can look at various aspects of this. We can look at the physics of speed. We can look how the public consensus on speed can very much affect what happens on the roads. We can look at the establishment consensus about what the establishment, the government says about the speeds and the limits. We can look at establishment action to put speed limits into place, and we can look at the resulting behavior change which comes from that. So the physics of speed are very much there, and they're quantifiable. It's about causation of collisions. It's about avoiding collisions. It's about the public health benefits which come from people being more able to cycle and walk on the streets. And it's about the survivability of pedestrians and cyclists, particularly when they're involved in vehicle collisions. There's very much a public consensus debate about how public spaces can be shared, the equality of independent mobility, whether people who want to cycle or walk will be able to feel comfortable to and don't have fear of walking or cycling. And you can all look at the public consensus about the cost of casualties to society, how much that is actually wasted economic output even from the results of crashes and casualties. The establishment consensus is very much about how the government and politicians are responding and have empathy with those community campaigns, understanding the gains which there are in values from lower speeds. It can set appropriate limits, and those reference limits become a reference point for how vehicles are used. And of course, the establishment, the government can put things into place in terms of action. It can do enforcement. It can do engagement through the media about why we're slowing down, why slower is safer, why slower is better for our communities, and it can do education as well. And the behavior change comes with lower speeds, with greater community ownership of places, these places becoming better places to be, and of course, lower casualties. But when we're considering speed, we always link this to danger, but maybe we need to recognize that often where we perceive danger, it's actually where there is less danger, and we perceive less danger where there actually is more. And often different people are involved, perceive things very differently. For example, most people see danger outside schools, but children are at danger for the whole route from home to school. They don't suddenly become more exposed to danger within 100 meters of a school. So it's important to look at their whole route rather than just outside of schools. And of course, there may be local issues, such as the school being on a main road, which could affect this. But the real danger to children is where they're not so obvious and walking singly in a small group rather than massing outside of a school gate. Drivers also see danger from a safe, protected car. It's warm or cool, it's safe, it's comfortable, and they are in control. Vulnerable road users, on the other hand, feel much more vulnerable. Plus, they have vehicles coming from both directions and even more at junctions. They also may be watching others in traffic lights. They see danger all around them and are constantly working out how fast, how long to reach me, how long to cross the road. These are all things which vulnerable road users have to take into account all the time when they're walking and cycling. And let's remember that the consequence of mistakes is so much greater for a vulnerable road user. If a driver makes a mistake, it's a scratch or a dent on their car. But to the pedestrian or cyclist, it may be a broken arm or leg, serious injury, or even death. And drivers aren't the only people making mistakes. Pedestrians and cyclists do as well. We should have a safe system that doesn't result in death when mistakes are made. And that's why we should consider how our streets look from a different perspective. Not as adults behind the steering wheel, but crouch down so your eyes are the same height as an 8-year-old. Or even try crossing the road at the speed of an 80-year-old, or view it from a wheelchair. Or try looking at those roads with imperfect hearing or sight, because all of these are people who have just as much right to move around our communities safely as we do when we're driving a car. And looking at children, it's very important to consider their development and that they don't have the same skills as adults. Children are actually unable to cope with traffic speeds above 20 miles an hour or 30 kilometers per hour without putting their lives at risk. Children aren't born with road sense. It's something which develops. It develops with their own cognitive skills, the development of visual acuity, and the ability to process all these things which are happening. In fact, it is not until children are in their teens that they can reliably assess traffic speeds, process decisions around their own safety, and hope to cross the roads safely. And remember that they will make mistakes. In the University of Iowa, a simulation was set up and found that with traffic at just 25 miles an hour, then 1 in 20 crossings for 10-year-olds resulted in a collision. It wasn't until children were 14 that collisions were reliably avoided. In the University of London, Professor John Wong measured the ability of children to assess the speed of oncoming cars. We all do this by noting the car's distance and rate at which it looms. That is the rate at which its image in our eyes grows. It's the way we all assess speed, and it's based on both on visual acuity and experience. He found that at speeds above 20 miles an hour, children up to 11 years old may not be able to detect the speed of cars reliably. They could not differentiate between a 25 mile an hour car and perhaps one at 35 or 45 miles per hour. And therefore, children cannot be relied to protect themselves. We must prevail on adults to do that for them. And the best way we can do that is to lower speed to a range in which they are better able to protect themselves, and we are better able to protect them as well. After all, we are the ones who are the adults. So let's recap on why set 20 mile an hour or 30 kilometers per hour speed limits. Well, they reduce the danger on the road. In the 11 meters that a car traveling at 30 kilometers per hour can stop, a 50 kilometers per hour car is still traveling at 45 kilometers per hour. This is because nearly all of that 11 meters has been used for the driver thinking time, and they have only just started to brake and reduce speed. And research shows that for every 1 kilometer per hour drop in speed, there is on average a 4% drop in casualties in an urban environment. It reduces emissions. The less aggressive driving reduces exhaust emissions due to acceleration and tire brake emissions due to braking. And yes, we've said that it takes nearly 3 times as much energy to get to 50 as it does to get to 30. It reduces noise, and it reduces the inequality and injustice that comes with vulnerable road users paying for mistakes of drivers or themselves with injury or death. And it really is the necessary foundation for promoting active travel and therefore public health. For example, pedestrians have shown to have a 90% chance of survival when struck by a car traveling at 30 kilometers per hour or below, but less than 50% chance of surviving an impact at 45 kilometers per hour. Pedestrians have almost no chance of surviving an impact at 80 kilometers per hour. And let us reflect on the fact that in crowded road networks, there is little benefit in traveling faster than 30 kilometers per hour. It merely gets to your next congestion point a couple of seconds earlier, so you can wait a couple of seconds longer. Any perceived benefit of speed between congestion points is an illusion. It's why so many organizations say that where motor vehicles mix with pedestrians and cyclists, 30 kilometers per hour is the maximum safe speed. In fact, a community that permits 50 kilometers per hour on residential roads will never be child friendly. It will always deter physical activity. And there is a moral point as well. Speed becomes theft when it stops us and our children from walking or cycling on our roads through fear of traffic. And another point is, what about the children who have no choice other than to walk or cycle on our roads to get to school and actually have their education and have their life? So what can you do? Well, firstly, recognize that speeds and limits above 30 kilometers per hour are no longer appropriate for where people mix with traffic. Start a community campaign to win back those public spaces between buildings for all your road users. Make your community support tangible. Target policymakers with evidence of that support and global best practice which is there. Use slowdown days using the World Health Organization Toolkit, and make your place a better place to be a child or cyclist or a pedestrian. Well, I'll start a community campaign for 30 kilometers per hour speed limits. And we have found this 9-point route map to gaining lower speed limits. Recognize that something is wrong with the way roads are shared and vulnerable road users disadvantaged. Start a community campaign gaining support for lower speed limits. Start and make that debate about those public spaces that we call streets. Make the community support tangible. And once you've got it tangible, then you can draw in the politicians responsible for community, and they see that support as their constituents and supporters. Involve professionals who cope with the inequality on the roads, the doctors, the firemen, the public health, the teachers, and get your authority or local government to decide upon a local speed limit. Implement the change speed limits with clear signage, and then use community engagement program to ensure everyone realizes the wide benefits of going slower, owning that new speed limit within the community and recognizing it's good for the community, good to go slower, good to actually think about the other people on the roads, and get a 30 kilometers per hour limit on your community roads. So, slowdown days. For the 4th UN Road Safety Week 2 years ago, we developed a toolkit on holding slowdown days. It's an outdoor activity event providing an opportunity to transform a street or many streets into safer, quieter, cleaner places by changing the speed of vehicles. Slowdown days can be formed from single or multiple activities to promote lowering the speed limit, increasing compliance, or gaining support. Slowdown days highlight why slower speed matters. A 30 kilometer speed limit is best practice where pedestrians and cyclists mix with vehicles. And slowdown days reassess the streets as community streets for all. And they can show the huge popularity which there is within communities for slower speeds and lower limits. Typical slowdown day activities could be a walk around your community with politicians. You could hold a public meeting, set up a campaign group, persuade the police to hold an enforcement day, petition the public, become a slower speed champion, Get pledges from local or national celebrities. This one is Chris Hoy, the Olympic gold sprint cyclist. Create and show casualty maps and get the public to put a marker where they feel speed should be reduced. Hold a public demonstration, carry out a survey. A break distance challenge shows the distances it takes to stop at various speeds. Hold a vigil for those who've died on the roads, or have a street party. Demonstrate the building height that crashes are equal to in terms of falling for pedestrians. Give out stickers, or even have a competition for a logo. There's so many things which you can actually do to show that speed matters, and slowing it down makes our places better places. A slowdown day kit we developed for WHO was used in over 1,000 events across the world in 2017. It gives you all you need for a successful campaign. You can get excited about your event and what you can achieve. You form a team of friends, neighbors, other NGOs, politicians. You define what you want, what are your objectives, what do you want to achieve. Keep it simple, keep it clear, understand who you're going to influence, and what it is you want to change. Plan your event, organize it well, work out who's going to do what, how you're going to get people involved. Most importantly, when you're doing that, enjoy the day, be happy, be safe, take pictures, use Twitter, use SLOWDOWN, use Facebook. Really show that this is something which will make your place, your community, a better place. And then follow up and continue to campaign review, see what worked, see how you can do it better next time. And also in the Slowdown Day Toolkit, there's a sample risk assessment, tips and suggestions about how to go about it, and links to resources which you can use. Thank you for your attention. I hope I've given you some ideas and inspiration. If you love 30 where your people work, play, shop, learn and live, then maybe you can make your place a better place to be and liberate your community. The campaign for slower speeds is winning speed limit reductions around the world. Be part of the change in making your place a better place to be. Thank you.
Thank you, Rod, for your valuable insights. We hope that you have found this webinar useful. If you have any questions, please get in touch with us and don't forget to complete the feedback form. Have a safe day.